This is the Poolies podcast with Matt Larkin and Stephen Ellis.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of Puck Poolies, presented by ProLine Plus. It's Matt Larkin with Stephen Ellis. And Stephen, minutes before we started the show, we found out about the Ottawa Senators purchase almost $1 billion. Michael Andlauer, give me just a quick reaction before we jump in.
Well, it sounds like he was one of the favorites from the beginning. And, he had ownership stake in an NHL team, stake in an OHL team. So he knows how to run a hockey team. And let's look at it. Like the Ottawa, they're the Hamilton Bulldogs, now the Brantford Bulldogs, one of the most successful teams in the last couple of years. So, let's see how it works.
Yeah, I think you're right. At least from what I understand, among the various suitors, it was the best case scenario because of the fact that he has that experience, pretty steady hand, and Eugene Melnyk, the late Eugene Melnyk, his daughters keep 10% of the franchise, which is kind of nice too. So we'll see where that new arena ends up going. Maybe LeBreton Flats, but we'll find out. It should be interesting in the weeks and months to come. So we are entering the offseason mode. We're starting to see player movement since our last show. We saw Ivan Provorov change teams. Damon Severson changed teams. They both went to the same team, the Columbus Blue Jackets. So we're getting into that mode, even though the stupid Stanley Cup Final is still being played. But we do want to get going with our offseason fantasy discussion and preview it. So that's going to be where we start today, right? It's going to be the offseason preview part 1, which is going to be looking ahead to possible trades and free agency. So let's get it started, my friend.
All right, let's look at Connor Hellebuyck to start. This is a guy that is very interesting due to the fact that he's, it sounds like he won't be going back to Winnipeg, won't sign an extension. And it's someone that can still be a starting goalie. We know he's still one of the best goalies, but where do you want to see him go?
Yeah. So, and just to rewind it a couple seconds, we're doing trade candidates here first. We're going to talk about prospective free agents, but this segment will do the main trade candidates that are pretty much, if not guaranteed, as close as you can get, almost locks to get moved in the coming weeks. So Connor Hellebuyck, if we're looking for where would be the ideal destination for his fantasy value, which is what is most important to Puck Poolies listeners, I believe, because we're talking fantasy here, I really like the idea of Connor Hellebuyck playing for the New Jersey Devils. That is a team to me that I think could be my Stanley Cup pick for next season, depending on what happens in the weeks to come. Assuming they get Jesper Bratt figured out with his contract and Timo Meier, I really like their chances next year if they can solidify that goaltending. So just from a fantasy value standpoint, I would love to see Hellebuyck in New Jersey. I think he would lead the NHL in wins if he goes there.
See, the one we've brought up Carolina before is a team that needs a goaltending. We do know Kochetkov will be ready to go. He's got a very friendly deal there. But if they do move on from Freddie Anderson, Hellebuyck to me would be a great pickup there. But I think for that, it's just that's going to take a lot of assets to bring that in. It's like a team that they're in their contending window now. You don't want to give away a lot of good assets, but you can maybe it means you got to throw away a guy like, maybe you put in Martin Netjes in a deal. Maybe you throw in Suzuki. These deals that we've been hearing as a potential offer for a guy like Alex DeBrincat. Well, what if you get that goalie you really need? Because while goalies are hit or miss, and Hellebuyck has had those hit or miss years, he's had enough of those hit years where you can really, if you could rely on any goalie, he's one you can rely on. So what do you think of Carolina there?
It's interesting. I think, for him, it would be a boon to his value. I'm sure his rate stats would be the best of his career because Carolina does such a good job preventing chances. But I wonder, because Carolina is so good defensively, it's almost like whoever plays goalie for them ends up with good numbers. So in my mind, what they need more is scoring if they're going to have to devote resources. So I don't know if it's worth removing one of their main forward assets to go get a Hellebuyck. I think they can probably find a cheaper replacement that they can pair with Kochetkov next year. So I don't love Carolina for Hellebuyck. I love Carolina for a few other names that we're going to get into. So we'll keep the train moving here.
All right. Next one is Pierre-Luc Dubois, the guy who's been linked to the Montreal Canadiens for what seems like about 25 years. We've heard some of the asking prices that seem a little ridiculous, but what are your thoughts there?
My favorite potential destination for Pierre-Luc Dubois would be the Minnesota Wild. And that is one of the teams I listed as a potential landing spot for him. I have an article on dailyfaceoff.com right now looking at the potential destinations, and Montreal is one of them as well. But just the idea of Dubois playing with Kirill Kaprizov, to me, if he goes to Minnesota, he gets an unquestioned number one center job. Joel Eriksson Ek, obviously a great player as well, but he has to do a lot defensively. So if Dubois were to go to Minnesota in a trade, I think he's going there specifically to play with Kirill Kaprizov, and I think he would have career best numbers in that scenario. Of course, it's a little complicated for Minnesota. They have more than $14 million in buyout penalties to figure out, so it's not the easiest trade to make. They'd have to move a body out that has a significant cap hit as well. But just from a hockey standpoint, he's a great fit there. And I think from a fantasy standpoint, he could have the best numbers of his career if he goes to Minnesota.
Minnesota was the first one I picked, and obviously there's a lot of people projecting to go to Montreal, but it's like crazy idea. What about Columbus again? Like, like well, like they're starting to build something, and they're willing to trade assets. And you know what? They've had a lot of good young defenseman prospects that they're gonna not have space for all of them. So at a certain point, maybe that's what you look at and say, like, okay, like maybe Svozil and a couple of other assets, and we bring in a guy like Dubois if he'd be willing to go back. But like now, that team would be pretty competitive given all the trades they've been making.
It's funny. I thought of that just from a hockey standpoint. It actually makes a ton of sense. And I actually was talking to Jarmo Kekalainen last week about the Provorov trade, and he was saying he's not done and he knows that he needs a center. So it actually would fit. I just don't see Dubois being willing to go back there because his whole thing is forcing his way out of various cities. So I would be pretty blown away if that happened. I also think Colorado would be an interesting fit if they don't want to spend the overpay to keep JT Compher. Go for Dubois instead, and then you have Dubois and McKinnon up the middle.
Yeah, especially if Landeskog out, and you need some extra scoring punch up there. So that was another one I thought. It's just like, how do they make that work? Carter Hart, a lot of questions about whether he'll be traded or not. That we know the Flyers are willing to make a move there if they need to, but there's been talk about whether his status of being on that 2018 Team Canada team will impact anything. We don't know what the situation is. We don't know how he's linked, if he's linked, whatever. But at this point, that is a question. But if he is moved, where does Carter Hart go?
To me, I would like to see him go to a team that has strong structure in place, because we know he actually had some resurgent years the last couple seasons in Philadelphia. It didn't really show in the overall numbers because he just had bad teams playing around him. But after that really rough season he had in the shortened 2020-21 season, I think he's really bounced back. And I would love to see him on a team like, for example, the LA Kings, that's kind of knocking on the door of true contention. They're a good defensive team. They have good defensive forwards as well. So I just think he'd have so much more insulation and protection that we could see him post the best numbers of his career on a team like that.
It's funny. The team that stuck out to me first was Ottawa, and it's a team that is on the rise. They get a good young goalie that can really solidify them. I think, again, goalies are hit or miss. He has had a lot of misses in his career, but we just know that the potential's there. He was playing in a Philadelphia team that was dead on arrival last year. When you got key players that are out for the season at the start of the season, that doesn't help. So Ottawa would be one I would think would like to see, and there will always be people like wondering, like, what about Toronto? Just because of Samsonov is a restricted free agent, would Hart be an upgrade? I'm not sure. We saw what Samsonov was able to do this year. We know Joseph Woll's coming, but with Murray or of Hart, I don't think there's going to be a shortage of suitors. It was interesting though that it sounded like the Montreal Canadiens were out on him right away, because that seemed like a guy that would really be the one that bring them forward. But so I'm thinking Ottawa, just because we know he'll get a ton of starts there, and I do expect Ottawa to be a better team. Next up, Alex DeBrincat. Speaking of Ottawa, he's a guy who's heavily in the rumor mill right now. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's fun to sort of picture the different spots for him because he's so much still in his prime. And I think last year it took him a while to get going, but I still think there's another monster season or several more monster seasons in him if he lands in the right environment. It's fun to sort of fantasy cast him on Edmonton Oilers, sort of reconnect the Erie Otters with him and Connor McDavid. And we know the Oilers have had a little bit of trouble filling that right wing. Kyler Yamamoto just has not peaked and become what he was supposed to be. And of course, Jesse Puljujärvi is now gone. So I like that idea, but the Oilers are still already pretty strong at forward. They don't really need that much help. To me, the New York Rangers are desperately in need of help on the right side now, because you have Patrick Kane as a UFA. You have Vladimir Tarasenko as a UFA. I don't know for sure that we'll see either of them back. Definitely not Kane. Tarasenko, he was fine as a Ranger, but I don't think he absolutely lit it up. And this would give the Rangers a body with much more upside. You'd much rather be paying DeBrincat, who's in his mid-20s, as opposed to Tarasenko, who's exiting his prime now. And I kind of like the idea of a trade that maybe sends Alexis Lafreniere to Ottawa. That's someone who could use a fresh start. And then you get two of the top three picks from the 2020 draft in your lineup. But I still think there's plenty of potential in Lafreniere, but I do think he needs to go somewhere that gives him a bigger chance to play higher in the lineup more consistently. And we just know the Rangers, like, they're in win now mode right now, and they're just really weak on the right side at the moment, especially because unfortunately Capo Caco also has not been realizing his potential. So I think from a hockey standpoint, that would be a great fit.
Yeah, I 100% with the Rangers. Oilers can't go wrong there, and the Hurricanes has been the one that a lot of Sens fans have kind of linked him to. So
Mm-hmm.
this would be a good fit, and talking about the Hurricanes needing another guy who could score goals. There's your guy.
Yeah, I love that fit too. Carolina is a perfect fit for him.
All right, next up, Evgeny Kuznetsov has only ever played for the Washington Capitals in his entire career. There's been his best years seem to be behind him at this point, but it looks like he just needs a fresh start. And the Capitals are not in a full rebuild at this point, but they've sold off some assets. It looks more like a retooling at this point. They won't rebuild as long as Ovechkin's there, which is also part of the reason why I think they're going to pick up Matvei Michkov. But your thoughts on Kuznetsov and where he could go?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm sort of recycling some of the same picks, but there's a reason for it. There are certain teams we know that just need forward help. I think Minnesota with Kaprizov would be a good fit as well, but I actually have Carolina for Kuznetsov as the number one fit because that's a team that just, since they let Vincent Trocheck go, they could not solidify that number two center. Jordan Stahl, more of a defensive role. He's a UFA as well. I'm sure he'll be re-signing. But Jesperi Kotkaniemi, he had his moments, but he didn't consistently show he can be the number two guy. I think Kuznetsov in Carolina would be a much better fit. Someone who's just more of a pure offensive player, which is what Carolina needs. They have so many players who are just very conscientious defensively at forward. They need someone who's just all about the offense. So I like him for Carolina.
Yep. No, there's a reason we keep mentioning Carolina. There's a team that's right kind of at the front here and could do something very good in the next couple of years. But it feels like their contention window opened a few years ago, and they just haven't been able to get over that hump. Now they got to start doing something, and they got to go out there. And you wrote a good story about it. They got to make a move for a big star at this point because Kuznetsov would fit that bill. Mark Scheifele, a guy who, Winnipeg Jets, it just seems like they're going to have to blow everything up. I'll throw one name on the board right here, Boston Bruins, a team that, with who knows what's going to happen with Patrice Bergeron and guys like David Krejci. But if you could bring those guys back and then you could also get Scheifele in it, I think you keep that window open for another year for sure.
Ooh, that's an interesting pick, especially because if Boston is still considering itself in just pure win now mode, maybe you don't even have to sign Scheifele to an extension. Maybe you just rent him and you figure out the cap stuff for the next season later. They are still in a bit of a pickle because they have those bonus overages. They have to pay Bergeron and David Krejci. I think it's more than $4 million. So it's a little tricky, but if they're losing one or both of them, of course, they have to replace their center position. So that's a very interesting fit. I like that one. Carolina, of course, I don't have to go into the reasoning because we know we've already said it several times on the show already. They need a number two center. A couple other options. I think Columbus would be very interesting for Mark Scheifele. So the Blue Jackets are a team that they are trying to think long-term, as Kekline told me last week, but he also indicated, they need that center. And the two pieces they've added, Provorov and Severson, sends a message that they're actually trying to climb quicker than they might have implied originally. So to me, he would level up that offense. Maybe you have to sacrifice someone like a Cole Sillinger, who did take a step backward in his second season with the Blue Jackets last year, right? So maybe he could use a change of scenery anyway. You'd also have Scheifele and Laine. They weren't always line mates, I know, in Winnipeg, but they had plenty of time together. So that could be a little bit of a rekindling there too. I also like Seattle as a team that maybe now that they understand that they are way further ahead than they expected in their development, having Scheifele up the middle would give more insulation to Matty Beniers. It would also allow Shane Wright to develop slower. And I think that would really solidify you up the middle too. So he would be an interesting fit to me if Seattle decides, hey, we're pretty good. Let's kind of go for it here.
Yeah. With Shane Wright, a guy that really worked in his draft year on getting better defensively. And, it seemed like when they put him in, they were expecting goals. He wasn't scoring. Things weren't working. I thought his defensive play was actually pretty good. But you don't want to put him in that role where he's going to end up just becoming a defensive center when he's got that other skill. He's a good playmaker, smart shooter, things like that. So it's good to give him a bit of extra time. So I like Seattle actually a lot there. And it feels like a year ago, there was no way we'd be talking about Seattle being a team that'd be looking for all these big talents. But, it just, for a team that I think though, when you look back at how Vegas almost won the Stanley Cup in 2018. That was a team that just grinded everybody. They were built on hard work, and Seattle kind of had that same thing today, or this year, where Matty Beniers, you expect him to be good. He's going to be hopefully the team's first real star, but Vince Dunn was probably the MVP otherwise, and like
Mhm.
that's a guy you would never have expected. So this is a team that just you give these guys these opportunities, it works. But at some point, like Vegas, you're going to start to have to add those high profile pieces, and with Scheifele, that'd be a really good one. Erik Karlsson, a guy that feels like he's been in the trade rumor again for quite a long time. Wasn't traded at the deadline. He's got one of the most expensive contracts in the NHL, but he's on a team that literally just is. There's no words to explain how poor the San Jose Sharks are. So it looks like they're going to be shipping him out there. Where does he go?
To me, the Buffalo Sabres would be an amazing fit.
I like it.
If you look at all the studs that they have, they're really strong on the left side in terms of where everyone's natural position is. Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power are both lefties, right? And in terms of what you have on the right side, you don't have nearly as much upside. And the Sabres are ready to contend now. They could use a veteran leader. Erik Karlsson out there could really help the power play as well. And even on a personal level for him, it's probably a good fit because his wife Melinda is from Ottawa originally, so it's not too far from her hometown as well. And I just think it would be a great way to send a message that Buffalo is like ready to really make a push in the East. Of course, you'd need to find a way for San Jose to take on some money because we know Buffalo also wants to add a veteran leader at forward as well. But I really like the idea of Karlsson Buffalo. I think it would be a lot of fun.
We go back to Seattle. What about Seattle? A team with $20 million in cap space. It looks like the only really big name they got to sign is Vince Dunn. So there's that, but like you can handle that. But you're looking at that, Morgan Geeky, Daniel Sprong, Cale Fleury, Will Borgen, Carson Soucy, like those are guys that are restricted or unrestricted free agency. There's nobody making over $5 million on the blue line. No one making over 5.5 on the entire team. So actually, outside of Grubauer, the goalie, but they got the space to make that work, and Karlsson could give them a really nice push back there, and we know he could generate offense.
Interesting. Yeah, I think if you did that, maybe you would need to trade Justin Schultz because you might have a bit of a redundancy there. Not that Justin Schultz is Erik Karlsson, but just in terms of what he brings to the table. He's a righty who's just basically a pure offensive weapon. So you might want to move Justin Schultz to a team that just needs a righty puck mover in that scenario, but obviously he'd be a massive upgrade.
And the Seattle does have 4 picks in the first 2 rounds this year, so they do have some assets there. So we'll see. I feel like San Jose is not going to get perfect value for him regardless. So you just got to take what you take. And JT Miller, again, just going back to the guys who just been in the trade rumors for a while. Ever since before he signed his contract, there was all this talk about what he was going to trade. Then they signed him to a long-term deal. It didn't look like a great deal. He started to play better in the second half of that year, and we know he does have a lot of value fantasy-wise because he's a center, left wing, and a right wing. Let's hope he stays that way because that was part of what made him so valuable last year. But where does he go?
You know what's funny with JT Miller is for a while, like throughout the season, the idea was, oh my God, his extension hasn't even started yet. $8 million. What has Vancouver done? This is going to be a disaster. But now that we've gotten to the summer, so this would have been his UFA year, the idea of JT Miller being available for 7 years at $8 million, that's actually a discount. Like he would be probably getting $9 million on the open market. So to me, he's actually not that unattractive of a piece to pursue, especially now. Like I don't know if Vancouver would be willing to retain salary for an entire contract, but even if they don't, just that's a reasonable AAV for what he brings to the table. We know the Pittsburgh Penguins' previous regime had interest in him. I don't know what Kyle Dubas's plans would be, but for a team that clearly is trying to contend in the present, that would be a major piece to add to a forward core that was really struggling from a depth perspective. It would allow you to play, whether JT Miller drives his own line as a third line center, whether he plays the wing. I think it gives you a lot more options and deepens that forward group a lot and keeps that window open, even though I don't think they should be doing that. I think the Penguins are doomed, but clearly the way Kyle Dubas spoke in that intro presser, they plan to keep trying to run it back. So if that's the case, I guess go for it and chase a veteran. And JT Miller to me is a good fit.
Dubas is going to have to be aggressive. And while I do agree the Penguins do need to start looking forward here and not continue to try to make this work, at the same time, it's like with their prospect pool, it's just like it's going to take a while for them anyway. So I think at this point, just while you still have Crosby, while you still have Malkin, you have Letang, and you have to assume when Letang and Malkin signed, it was part of the deal was like, we're going to stay competitive. In that case, I think you got to still do something here. You can't just give up here. So, yeah, I like Pittsburgh as a pick there. We were just talking about guys who are trade candidates. Let's talk about players that are going to be pending free agents, and let's start off with which UFA you are expecting to lose fantasy value this year.
Okay, I believe that JT Compher's fantasy value is going to go down. If we look what happened this year, obviously he had a career year. He elevated into Nazem Kadri's spot, and it really worked well for Colorado. I think he had better offensive numbers than I thought he was capable of. But now he's probably priced himself out of Colorado because it's such a weak UFA class. I think it just would be wise for him to test the market. Somebody's going to overpay for him. But JT Compher is not someone who can create a ton of offense on his own. His most common line mate this year was Mikko Rantanen. If I played with Mikko Rantanen for a year, I'd probably get like 11 points in the NHL. That's how good Mikko Rantanen is. So I just think it's very difficult to imagine JT Compher having a better line mate, regular line mate, than what he had in Colorado. And even if he re-signs with the Avs, I think the Avs will possibly try to fortify their lineup more at forward this time around. And it's not even a guarantee that Compher is their number 2 center next year. So I just don't know if in either scenario we're going to see Compher in the same role next year. Good real life player, but I think he might be a little bit overvalued in fantasy next year.
Nope, I 100% agree. And it was going to the Stanley Cup Final in 2022 and seeing how many JT Compher jerseys there were. I'm like, wow, he's a big deal here. So I know that's a guy that they won't want to give away or let go, but just gonna pretty much have to happen. For me, it's Freddie Anderson. I think a guy that his health has been an issue the last couple of years. And you look at the games played. He did play 52 games last year, but he only played 34 games this year. And we know Kochetkov coming in Carolina, which makes what's the deal with Anderson here? For me, I think if they could somehow convince Anderson to come on a term-friendly deal to stay in Carolina, if that was possible, and have him work with Kochetkov, but knowing now that Kochetkov will probably be the number 1 guy and isn't going to be sent down to the minors due to cap reasons or the fact that like they have 2 other goalies. I think that this time, if you go with that combination, if he's willing to sign there, I still think that's a pretty good goalie combo because we know that Anderson, when he's healthy, is still a pretty strong goalie. His stats this year weren't great, but last year they were. Last year, he was a guy that was looking like a potential Vezina candidate for a long part of that season. A .92 save percentage, 922 with 4 shutouts, and he played over 50 games, 35 wins. Like that guy did really well. And this year, the stats weren't great, but he still got the wins. He can still bring in that value, and Carolina is still a good team. But if you're giving him like 35, 40 games, I think he's a valuable goalie in real life, but that loses your fantasy value. So for me, I'm thinking Freddie Anderson's not going to get better in fantasy hockey. He's not going to be the 35 win guy he was for a while, but he's still going to be someone where I think he's going to play on a contender next year, no matter what.
Yeah, I think that's bang on. And to me, not all goalies are like this. Some goalies do better when they get peppered, but it seems like Freddie Anderson settled well playing on a team that is really strong defensively in front of him. So it means that if he leaves Carolina, no matter what, basically, unless you're going to Boston, in which he's not, so it means he's guaranteed to be playing on a weaker defensive team, and that'll hurt his numbers. I think he can still help a team in real life. Like I said before, I think Buffalo would be a really cool fit for him as sort of a mentor, in tandem with Devin Levi. I think that would be it. But again, in that scenario, his own numbers would take a big hit. So I think that's a bang on pick.
Yeah. So, all right. I like that one. And which UFA are you expecting to gain fantasy value? And I'm thinking your pick is a hot take. As good as he's been, I'm still thinking it's a hot take.
Yes, and this one needs some explaining because I think he's going to be overvalued, but it's a matter of comparing what he was this year to what he was next year. So I'm picking Adin Hill. So based on his performance in the Stanley Cup Final, we're recording this on Tuesday, so by the time you're listening to this, it's possible that the Cup Final is over and Adin Hill has helped Vegas win. Going into Game 5, he had a .934 save percentage in the playoffs, .915 in the regular season. He was dominant. So if you look at any scenario now for Adin Hill, in terms of what his fantasy value is going to be next year, either A, he has earned himself a significant role on a new team, whether it's as a starter or 1B, he's going to be playing the most he's ever played next year. So that alone ups his value just for volume categories. Or Vegas decides, hey, he's our Stanley Cup winning goaltender. They keep him. And he forms a tandem. Maybe it's with Logan Thompson. They have a lot to sort out in that net. But again, that also cements his fantasy value because next year going in, he has a much more secure job for the entire season. So I do think he'll be overvalued because of what he did in the playoffs. So he could be a buyer beware next year. But if we're judging him in terms of how much his value is increased, I think wherever he goes, he's going to be a relevant goalie on draft day next year, which he absolutely was not at the start of the season this year.
I don't think he's going to be a number one goalie next year. But this is not a guy that just kind of showed up out of nowhere. This is not a Louis Domingue situation. This is a guy that, when we've talked about before, was a very highly rated goalie at one point as a prospect, and Coyote fans loving him, saying this guy's going to be very good, and now he's finally showing that. On the other hand, here you look at the other goalies this year. Laurent Brossoit had a .927 save percentage, didn't lose in regulation this year. 11 games, but still good numbers in those 11 games. Aiden Hill, 0.915. Logan Thompson, 0.915. Now, Hill's playing great in the playoffs. We got to give a lot of credit to how Vegas' defense is going, but you got to do a bit more than just, block shots. Like, you still have to have your good goalie, and he's been saving their bacon with a lot of highlight reel saves. But I think, just with I feel like Aiden Hill still needs a good defensive support system, because we saw him get exposed in San Jose. We saw him get exposed in Arizona. So that's why I'm thinking it's a bit of a hot take, but I do expect him to be a full-time NHL goalie next year, at least, for sure. It's not going to be like a 3 situation. He's not going to the minors. Mm-hmm. He'll be value there. I'm going to stick in Vegas, though, for a guy, Ivan Barbashev. And you look at how he played in Vegas. He had 16 points in 23 regular season games. He's been one of the best players in the playoffs, but he had a really rough time in St. Louis. Last year, he had 60 points. So everyone probably thought, oh, he's still a good, valuable pick. He goes out there, he gets 29 points with the Blues this year, just nowhere to be found. He needed a change of scenery. He was a good trade target. But I think that, now that we've seen enough of him in the last 2 years, if you ignore that St. Louis part, of him really playing some impressive hockey, I think that's the real deal. I think he will be there. Plus, we know he hits. He's an absolute wrecking ball of a player out there. Like, taking down Radko Gudas, that's not an easy thing to do, and he did it. So I think Barbashev's a guy that should be able to gain some value, because I do think now people should be able to have a bit more faith in him. It wasn't just like he went from 12 points to 60 points. Okay, can we trust that? And then he falls off. Okay, he's bad again. I think now, with the way he's played in Vegas, the way he's been so valuable for that team, I think people should have more belief in him now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny, he would be a good fit to stay in Vegas. I think the key thing is he showed how useful he can be as a winger. Maybe that's the thing. Just don't sign him to play center, sign him to play the wing and be a complementary piece on a top six role. And it seems like it's a really nice fit for him. So I agree. I think he's proven he can hang on a high skill line.
I just, I love guys that are that big, that could hit, that could score, that could do everything. It's just a fun player. So, all right. That's it for talking about those players. It is time for the tip of the week, which is, as much as any season, taught us not to invest fantasy draft capital in goaltending. Now, you're saying that to a guy who drafted 3 goalies in the first 5 rounds this year.
Yeah, so it's not exactly a new piece of advice to say, hey, goalies don't matter in fantasy, but the way I can summarize it is no, seriously, they really don't. Like, this year took that entire principle to an extreme. You look at who's in the Stanley Cup Final: Aiden Hill, Sergei Bobrovsky. Neither guy was even a starter for his friggin' team going into the playoffs. And so if I look at my own league scoring system, so that for goaltending categories, it has wins, saves, goals against average, save percentage, shutouts, 5 categories, okay? These are the top 10 in the 2021-22 season. Shesterkin, Markstrom, Sorokin, Anderson, Kemper, Saros, Tristan Jarry, Vasilevsky, Jack Campbell, Bobrovsky. This season, Ullmark, Sorokin, Ottinger, Georgiev, Hellebuyck, Shesterkin, Gustafsson, Vasilevsky, Saros, Samsonov. So only 4 of the top 10 turned over year and remained in the top 10. There are multiple guys top 10 in fantasy value who were not even starters when the season began, such as Gustafsson, Samsonov. So to me, it's just showing how fickle the position is. It's even more so. Vegas had 5 goaltenders this year that were viable NHL players and all had hot stretches. So to me, I think it's just solidified the idea of don't even touch goaltenders. Even the guy that you think is going to be the number 1 most reliable goalie on the board tends to disappoint. Like Jacob Markstrom was second in the Vezina Trophy vote last year. He was barely usable in fantasy this year. Maybe there are a couple exceptions. Like, I can't imagine Jake Ottinger having a bad year next year. And I feel very comfortable with Ilya Sorokin, of course. So yes, there are a few exceptions, but overall, unless you get one of those elite players, even like Linus Ullmark, there's nowhere to go but down after what he did this past season as well. So I think you go zero goalie, treat goalies like running backs in fantasy football more so than ever.
See, I do like Allmark, and I still think he'll be a good goalie, but I think it's just buyer beware for sure with him. It's just because again, I don't expect him to do that again. Like
Mhm.
that was unbelievable season. Like who, again, who knows? If what if he gets traded? Like there's just so many questions about the Boston Bruins this season. So I'd be a little worried about going there. So that's the tip of the week.
Alrighty. And next up, it's our best bets segment presented by Proline Plus. And obviously, we're still just playing out the string in the NHL season, even though we have teams making trades for next year. But here we are, Florida and Vegas are still playing hockey right now for some silly reason. Even basketball is done. But I digress. Uh, there are not too many things to bet on in terms of live action right now, but we are going to bet on Game 5. So again, this is Tuesday morning as we record this. You can still place your bet for the game, which is tonight. And I'm looking at the under minus 5.5. Okay. For Game 5 at plus 205 is the value on that one. And the reason why sorry, one sec here, Stephen. I just had an Adobe alert pop up here on my screen. Get out of here, Adobe. Okay. What was I saying? So the under minus 5.5 goals for Game 5. The reason why I'm liking the under is the series has gotten tighter as we get deeper into it. Games 1 and 2 had 7 goals and 9 goals. Games 3 and 4 had 5 goals each. We also know Matthew Tkachuk's status is very much in doubt. Either he's not going to play or he's going to play and be significantly hobbled. So that holds back Florida's offense as well. I could see Vegas coming out a little tight. This is the first time in franchise history they have the Stanley Cup on the line. They have a chance to win it in their own building. I think there could be a bit of a Game 7 feeling each other out, kind of nervous atmosphere to start that game, which is going to keep offense limited. Teams might be trying not to make mistakes. So overall, I could see this being a tight, 3-1 type of game. Maybe Vegas does win it on home ice, but I just don't see it being a real barn burner. And that's why I like the under 5.5. What do you think?
I like it too. You look at Florida, they've been able to shut games down. When they need to win, they've been able to play a 2-1 hockey game quite effectively. And I expect that they're going to put up that fight today. I don't expect the Florida Panthers to win. I do think Vegas is going to pull this off and finish the series. Also, I hate that there's a 3-day break after this. We don't play again until Friday, so it's almost like to a point. It's like it'd be nice to see it not continue, but I think this is going to be a pretty tight game tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, a word from our sponsor, of course, as always. Proline Plus is not just another sportsbook, being the only sportsbook that gives 100% of profits back to Ontario. Proline has been your local trusted sportsbook for over 30 years, now offering Ontario sports fans more ways to play in-store, online, or take the game on the go with the Proline app. With your favorite sports and events right at your fingertips, download the Proline app and bet in-app with Proline Plus. To Proline Plus today, or head over to prolineplus.ca to learn more. First time that I've stumbled on the ad read, I think maybe all season. It's a sign that things are winding down, Stephen. Let's move on now and talk prospects. This is a prospect who's been popular. He has appeared in the section more than once, but there's another reason to discuss him now. So who do you have for us?
Yeah, I love talking about Lukas Reichel, and last time talked about him. He was just getting called up from Rockford. It was going to be playing the Blackhawks. I thought he looked great with the Blackhawks, but he's never going back to Rockford. It was very nice when I got to see him in the AHL this year. I will never see that again because he's going to be playing with Connor Bedard next year with the Blackhawks. I think that's just going to help his fantasy value so much. The fact that he's had 2 50-point seasons in the AHL is a very good sign. That's not easy to do for a 21-year-old because a lot of these guys that are his age are guys that are coming out their first year of CHL hockey and they're just trying to get adjusted to pro hockey. But he had that experience of playing in the DEL for 2 years. So he comes over. We saw him play a bit at the Blackhawks last year, but mostly for Rockford. He puts up 21 goals last year, 20 goals this year. We know he can score. It is not easy to put up points like that at his age. Usually guys that are putting up 50, 60, 70 points are guys that have been in the league for a long time. So that's very impressive. He was a play driver for the Rockford IceHawks, and he could do that again for the Blackhawks, a team that's, you look at the roster, you're like, who are half these players? Who are these guys going to be playing with Bedard next year? Reichel's going to go out there and make things a lot better. So I am very confident in his game. I think that Blackhawks fans should be very excited. He was drafted 17th overall in 2020, and to me, if we're doing a redraft, might be a top 10 prospect. So I think that the Blackhawks, there's as they start to move up, they got a really good prospect pool. Reichel's kind of one of those first real of this new era of the Blackhawks, one of the first real promotions to full-time duty, graduations, I should say. And I think that it's they're going to need someone to play with Bedard. He can.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. I think that Reichel is going to be one of the best deep sleepers for next season, and I think it works in any scenario. So let's say Reichel, because we know he can play center and the wing, so he can either end up on Bedard's wing, or Bedard attracts all the defensive attention, and Reichel gets to drive his own line and get sheltered matchups. So in any scenario, I think it's going to be very advantageous to him. And every time I think of any Reichel, I think of our old Hockey News pal Ken Campbell. And you know, every year there's the tanking slogan, fail for nail, or tank it for whoever. But the best one ever was for Jack Eichel. It was play like Robert Reichel for Jack Eichel. My favorite one of those ever. So kudos to Ken for that one. Okay, so let's end on that one and move on to some questions, Stephen. We have a few right now.
Okay, I have never heard that phrase before. That was good. All right, this one's from Nicholas Zuber. Which pending UFA will disappoint the most? Not a great class, and I feel like people are going to start overhyping players, especially heading into fantasy drafts.
Okay, good question, Nicholas. We did mention a couple names already, of course, on the show, but I'm going to add a new one, and that's Dmitry Orlov, who probably won't be back with the Boston Bruins based on what his price tag is going to be. He had that amazing surge in offense after the trade deadline, in which people started to call him Orlov. But he'd never had even a 40-point season in the NHL, still has not had a 40-point season in the NHL. He's never been a dominant offensive player. He's been very well-rounded. I'd say Orlov's brand is he's pretty good. He's a B in every single thing, right? He's like fairly good defensively. He can move the puck. He's not a dominant shutdown artist. He's not a dominant offensive player. He's just like pretty decent in every single category. So that makes him a very useful and versatile guy to put in your top four on D, but he's 31 years old. I just don't see him suddenly elevating his offense to a new level going forward just because he showed a nice little surge in Boston. So I think that he's going to get drafted for that production he showed in Boston, and I think he's going to disappoint relative to what his ADP is going to be.
See, I didn't know what your answer was going to be. You didn't list that, but I had a feeling that's who it was going to be, and that's who I would have picked. So we're in agreement there, especially for the numbers we're hearing, which were like, I don't know. I can't remember what Frank was saying on the Daily Faceoff Live, but it was something like ridiculous. Hockey Monkey 99 asks, do you see the Sabres making a trade for an experienced defenseman or going the free agency route?
Hockey Monkey 99. Let's just pretend this is a Wayne Gretzky burner account. Yes.
No, it's who's that? Not what's that monkey that was in all those movies in the 90s?
MVP.
Sports? Yeah, that's what it
is. Okay, so yes, I do think the Sabres are going to make a trade because if you look at the UFA market, well, already two of the top names are gone. So Gavrikov re-signs with LA. Severson, and we already mentioned the Sabres need a righty. Damon Severson goes to Columbus in that trade. It's a really weak-looking market out there right now. So to me, I think the better route is to go for a trade and bring in someone with experience. I could see Matt Dumba being someone you could buy really cheap from the Wild. Like they could probably eat some of his salary. We know they're trying to trim some cap space because they have those buyout penalties coming as well, right? So he's got a $6 million cap hit. What if the Wild retain half that? I think both teams would win in that scenario. Get Matt Dumba for $3 million for one season. Another name I'd be looking at is Andrew Peeke in Columbus because they have a bit of a logjam now with that decor really souped up. Of course, you have Zach Werenski coming back from injury, and you have Provorov, you have Severson, you have Adam Boqvist, you have David Juracek, who I think is going to make the team. So Peeke gets really pushed down that depth chart. I could see him being someone that Columbus moves out, and that could be a cheap pickup for the Sabres as well. So that's sort of a long version of an answer, but what I'm saying is I see the trade route being the way that Kevin Adam goes.
Okay, I like that. And this one's from Ranton and Raven. Who do you think will be the highest drafted backup or 1B goalie?
Great question from our question master, Ranton and Raven, because the 1B goaltender, as I said, talking zero goalie, you could just draft a team of 1Bs and you can end up running away with your league championship, right? Because you would have had Philip Gustafsson and Linus Ullmark if you did that this year, the two best goaltenders in the league this year. So in terms of who will be drafted the highest of the 1Bs, Jeremy Swayman's got the cachet right now, of course, in tandem with Ullmark. I think that Marc-Andre Fleury will be the highest drafted 1B because I think a lot of casual drafters won't even realize that he's a 1B. His playing time split with Philip Gustafsson was pretty even, but we know in the playoffs, Gustafsson was the name that they relied on more, and he slowly kind of took over the job as the season progressed. So I think Fleury by far will be the highest drafted goalie who's technically a backup. Maybe he still plays 35 or 40 games next year, but he's technically the number 2 now, in my opinion. Also, the Vegas logjam, because you don't even know who the starter is going to be. So technically, like Logan Thompson could be the 1B, or it could be Aiden Hill if he stays, but whoever's going to be the 1B will be someone who plays a lot, so he'll be drafted pretty high. In terms of the 1Bs that I would try to target, hoping to catch the wave next season, the big breakouts, Kochetkov, of course, who I've been high on for a while, and Joseph Woll in Toronto. I think that the Leafs, whether it's Samsonov or someone else, they're going to have a veteran option to pair with him, but I think that Woll will steal that job before the season's over. So to me, he's a great sleeper pick in drafts next year.
If you also play in a salary cap league, a 1B might actually be the way to go for goaltending. You save the money there. We know that you don't want to invest a whole lot in goaltending. And then if you were able to maximize that by getting a guy that's cheaper but still good, still gets a lot of starts, that could be valuable.
Yeah, for sure. That's. I think I don't even think there's a doubt right now that it's the way to go, just based on the way the position is going. So I'm with you all the way.
I'm still going to picture Sturkin and Sorokin and Vasilevsky next year, like I did this year. And I'll just say, goaltending won me my hockey pool. So,
but that's also because you're in your 4-team league. And to quote my dad, a regular Puck Poolies listener, he's like, Steven's got to join another league. He's got to be.
Well, I'm in another one, but it's not as interesting because I'm in a rebuild right now. But I didn't even do well enough in a rebuild to get Bedard. So,
damn,
it is.
Well, I got to try to draft Bedard. My team is so bad. I went for it. I'm in the Carolina Hurricanes. 3 straight conference final losses. And my best keepers, it's going to be bad. I have a rough year ahead.
Well, hey, your league's long term. I think you just got to draft Michkov. Just pray for the best.
Maybe, yeah. I might actually, yeah. We'll see.
All right, so it's time for the starting lineups. And it was a bunch of episodes ago you asked me about my favorite hockey team names. So today I'm going to ask you your top 6 hockey player names.
Okay, this is a fun one. I took some time going through my favorites, so I'll start at number 6, Maxim Fortunas. To me, he's like, we know Gladiator 2 has been greenlit. It's going to be filmed. I think they might have started production. Maxim Fortunas sounds like the new protagonist that rises from being a slave and then fights his way to win the crowd, just like Maximus, right? It's a great Gladiator sounding name. Number 5, Jonathan Quick, just because it's such a great name for a goaltender and because that is his game. It's not like Jonathan Quick's whole brand was positionally sound, efficient hockey. No, he was all about athleticism. He was quick, right? That was his whole thing. So it was such a perfect name for him when he was at his peak. Number 4, Miroslav Shatan. Just your last name, Satan. It's quite a shame that he never played for the New Jersey Devils, but I do enjoy that there was a controversy in the late 90s. I think it was Wayne Gretzky 3D hockey. And parents were complaining because he didn't have a photo for some reason. So he was just a blank face with Satan as his name when kids were playing the game, which was amazing. Number 3, Jeff Bukaboom. And again, just like with Jonathan Quick, it's not just a cool sounding name. It's a name that actually fits the player, which I love because Jeff Bukaboom was a very physical defenseman for the New York Rangers, 1994. I remember Mike Richter telling me that he had a hard time seeing over Jeff Bukaboom's butt all the time. And it drove him crazy. He was such a big dude. But great name for someone who likes to lower the boom. Number 2, Tony Twist. If you were just sitting in your home and someone knocked on the door and said, hello, you need to go outside and fight a man named Tony Twist. I think I would just lie down and cry. Like it's such a fitting name. It just sounds so badass. And he was like, Tony Twist was terrifying at his peak in terms of just the most feared enforcers in the game. And it's just such a punching, it sounds like a comic book alter ego in a Marvel comic, right? Tony Twist. Fantastic name. Alliterative name. And number 1, I'm going to go for another alliterative name, Zarli Zalapsky. Have you ever met a Zarli, let alone a Zarli whose last name also started with the letter Z? Double Z as your name. It's just the most unique sounding name in NHL history. I've never heard of another Zarli, and that name is just as memorable as it gets. So I stand by my list. Those are my top 6 hockey names of all time.
See, there's a page on Elite Prospects called Awesome Player Names, and I've literally had it bookmarked for as long as the page has existed because it's just great. You get guys like Brock Loser that played college hockey, Paris Doofus who was on the Coyotes, Dan Drinkwater, Racy Big Snake. Guys like Yutaka Fukufuji was always a good one there too. Guillaume Latendresse. Part of the reason why I have one of his jerseys is because I thought his name was so cool. Rick Ice, a goaltender. I thought that's a good one. There was like MLE Pizza, I think. One here, a guy played on the Minnesota Fighting Saints called Dick Paradise. Brad Pitt played hockey, the different one. Brooker, Pretty Young Man. I like that one. Derek Punches, Darren Pupa, Lacey Rabbit, just, awesome names.
Yeah. Hockey's a great name sport. I think the only sport that trumps hockey is maybe like old old school baseball names when players' nicknames were just their first name, like Oil Can. Is it Oil Can Boyd? Names like that. But yeah, hockey's got a nice treasure trove of names.
There
So
was a
that's
guy. I went to a short little dirt track here, and there was a guy who was going by the name of like Rockstar McGee.
that's incredible. And now I think the new frontier of hockey names is just whatever's going on out there in the West, where every guy's name is Jaden or Jackson, a million different spellings of Wason and Jason and Gleason or whatever the hell they're doing out there. It's just going to keep getting better and better. It's reached self-parody levels, I think, at this point. Well, Stephen, that's it for the starting lineup. That's it for this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to our sponsor, ProLine Plus, and thank you, of course, Stephen, as well, who always doubles as the producer of this show. And our offseason preview will continue with our next episode. We will look ahead to the draft. We will be at the draft. We'll podcast while we're there. But before next week, we will tee it up and look at the fantasy storylines that are hanging over what's going to be a very exciting draft.